So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good morning. I can't even imagine how many times over the past 2 years kids have said to their parents, "I'm bored." I remember when I was younger and I would say to my parents that I was bored, or my brothers and I were bored, the common response that we received, and I think parents have still held on to that. I know I said it as a parent. When my children said to me, "I'm bored," my response to them was usually something to the effect of, "Well, I wasn't put here to entertain you." When I was growing up, my parents often said, "So why don't you just go watch television?" Even though my mother had a few choice descriptors for what a television actually was. She referred to it sometimes as an idiot box. I don't know if you remember that phrase, but the thought was that it would numb our minds so much so that we wouldn't be able to think anymore. But I guess the alternative of my parents having to entertain us, that was better. Or they would say to us something that was common back in those days, less common today, is go outside and play. Right? And with 3 brothers, when we would come inside or something would happen in the house, but I was bored, that was usually met by my parents saying, "What were you thinking?" Because it meant usually that we broke something. And then the kids grew up and they left the house, and the hustle of getting them from activity to activity waned. And then for me at least, and I know for many people, the focus became our work, what we did for a living. And for many of us, we rose to great success in our careers, and then it dawned on us at one point or another, or many of us, that maybe we would retire at some point. And you start to think about that question of retirement, and you say to yourself, well, what am I going to do in my retirement? Right? Because the idea of being so busy all the time for so many years leaves you with this inconceivable thought that you would have extra time on your hands, that you might even have spare time on your hands. Believe you me, I have thought long and hard about retirement. I know exactly what I'm going to do in retirement, but ask anybody who has been retired, and they will say they've never been more busy. Thank you. And then sometimes they even respond, "I don't know how I got anything done while I was working." You see, we're very, very good at filling our time. It's just the moment when our work stops that we're filled with a little bit of anxiety. And I'm not talking about when you come home from a long day of work and you feel that sense of accomplishment that so many of us feel after putting in a good day's work. We feel really good about what we did. And I'm not talking about looking into the abyss and wondering what's coming next. This week's Parashat talks exactly about that moment. Kichol asher tziva Adonai et Moshe, kain asu b'nei Yisrael, et kol avodah. Just as God had commanded Moses, so the Israelites had done everything that God had asked of them to do. Their work was done. God had asked the Jewish people to build a tabernacle, and in this week's Parsha, at the very end of the book of Shemot, we see that the Jewish people did exactly what God had told them to do, and they were done. The question becomes, what are they going to do with the next 38 years? In trying to generate a homily on this verse, the Or HaChaim actually points out that the Torah says this exact phrase 3 times. That God had instructed the Jewish people, Kechol asher tziva Adonai et Moshe, through Moses, and the Jewish people had completed everything. Kechol asher tziva Hashem. In accordance with all that God had commanded Moses, we find this statement 3 times, says the Or HaChaim. Perhaps he suggests to us that the Torah is trying to teach us that the Jewish people had been fully rehabilitated from the sin of the golden calf. And the 3 times suggested 3 separate stages in their rehabilitation. One is they had rid themselves of idolatrous thought. They had rid themselves of idolatrous speech, and now they had rid themselves completely of idolatrous actions. And I have to tell you, there's something to that approach. Some of us say, when I have time, I'll make up for all that has been lost. All those years that we spent working so hard, I'll spend, when I retire, more time with my kids. I'll spend more time reading the books that have been sitting on my nightstand. I'll spend more time taking better care of myself. But you see the problem with that, and that is that kids grow up and they move away. It's not the same type of time. And we know that as we get older, our bodies fade a bit. And the ability to get back into shape is so much more difficult. And sometimes those books that we wanted to read so desperately seem out of date. So the Or HaChaim says we all try to make it up for what we missed in the past, for the wrongs that we did. But sometimes time has passed. Chaim of Chernovich, a direct student of the Baal Shem Tov, gives us this beautiful comment that I think digs a little deeper into the verse. He says, Sheshet yamim ta'avod v'asita kom lachtecha u'chi'ora v'chi chayuv ha'adam la'avod avodah b'sheshet yimei ha'maseh u'pukchaze kama batlei ika b'shuka. He says something so extraordinarily beautiful. He says, the Torah commands us to work. 6 days of the week we're supposed to work, and Shabbos we rest. Chaim of Chernovich says it's not an all or nothing proposition. That's not how life ought to work. You ought not say to yourself that I'm going to work for a certain amount of time and then I'm going to stop. Says the Chernover. 6 days, he says, you work. This is the lesson. And then on the 7th, you rest. And then you can sustain your working even longer. He says something beautiful. The reason why we can be productive for 6 days is because we take Shabbos once a week. The Jewish people's work is not done after they finish the work of the tabernacle. It continues. Indeed, every person is required to work. You can't say that at some point in my life I'm just going to stop being productive. You know, it's so funny, my father retired. But he never retired. I felt so badly for every successor that he had in his congregation. Because even after my father retired, he outworked them all. Kept giving classes. He kept visiting people in the hospital. He kept studying every day. He never stopped working. It was unfair. I told him he should do that in another town. It's unfair. These kids coming out of rabbinical school, how could they possibly keep up with him? Go see how much time people waste. Says Chaim of Chernovich. He says, see how much time people waste while they're supposed to be productive. His comment is so deep. First, he tells us that God worked for 6 days and then took Shabbos. And therefore, we're supposed to imitate God and work 6 days and then take Shabbos. But then Chaim of Chernovich says something even deeper, and that is that God continues to participate in the creation of the world every day. God is not absent from our world. God is here and now and continuing to participate in the evolution of the world. And so are we supposed to do the same. Maybe our work will change when we retire, but we'll still continue to have to work. We'll have to take tasks seriously. And we, like God, can continue to create worlds. We can create worlds of friendship. We can create worlds of kindness. We can create worlds of peace. We can create worlds of love and care. Chernovich says, there are certain works that are prohibited on Shabbos. And from those works, we know we learn the same. There are certain things you just can't do on Shabbos. But we still can build relationships and friendships on Shabbos. Finally, Chernovich offers one more insight. He says that we have gleaned what is prohibited on Shabbos from what is prohibited work in building the tabernacle. The 39 melachot, he says, are those things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos because that's what they did in building the tabernacle. And so, Chernovich is teaching us this incredibly important lesson. And that is that some are about building places in space. As Heschel would say, Shabbos is about building holiness in time. For Chernovich, the inheritance of the Torah and the Talmud and its modern application is necessary. And we can build all the best buildings in the world. And we can have state-of-the-art facilities, but without the values that we instill in them, then we're all lost. Don't lose sight of what's truly important. Don't focus on your day off, but focus on what you do when you're working. Don't focus on what you're going to do when you retire. Focus on what you're going to do to produce and make the world better now. As much as God instructs us to observe Shabbos and keep it holy, so too, Chernovich is saying, make sure you remain productive. 6 days you got to work. That's part of the commandment. 7th day you can take off as rest. That's also a commandment. Both are necessary to living full, productive lives. Work and time off. Or as my kids call it, time to veg out. As much as we need to curl up on the couch and maybe watch Netflix, we also need to be productive. And there is much work to do. Lo alecha amlacha ligmor velo ata ben chorin libatel mimena. There's a lot of work to do, and maybe you'll feel overwhelmed by it, but that doesn't mean you get to just take off and give up entirely. You've heard the phrase that the devil makes work for idle hands. It means trouble arises when you don't keep yourself busy. Klalot shenikleklu Adam v'Chava. Chernovich says that the reason why Adam and Eve got into trouble because they didn't have enough to do. They were just sitting around in the Garden of Eden. And you know what their punishment was? That they had to work the soil and toil. It's not good to just sit around, maybe play pickleball all day. A few weeks ago, I had dinner with somebody, and I was surprised when they asked me, what am I working on now? I was surprised by the question because I didn't really understand what they were saying. You know, I am a rabbi. I do keep busy. So she said, when she saw this quizzical look on my face, she said, well, before we got together for dinner, I Googled you. Googled me. And I saw, she said, how much you've written, the various responsa that I've written. She said that she noted that I wrote a book, that I had published a number of different articles. She noticed how many classes that I give and the variety of programs that our synagogue does. And she was wondering if I was in process of developing anything new. Truthfully, I was taken aback. First, who Googles somebody that they're going to have dinner with? Second, who tells them that they Googled them? And so I was lucky because I'm still in the middle of a project right now, and that is I'm writing a children's book on how you get ready for Shabbos. But the question is a good one. What are you working on? And I add, what are you working on that's going to make this world a better place? It's going to make this world more holy. What are you working on? In case anybody is wondering, I do have my retirement all figured out. I'm going to spend my mornings reading and writing. Then I'm going to work out, cardio and some weight-bearing activities. Then I'm going to go for a walk on the beach or the woods, depending on where I'm living. You know, we all have to take care of our minds and our bodies. Then I'm going to have a shower, have a quick lunch. Then I'm going to go to the farmer's market or specialty food shops, and then, of course, the wine store. I'm going to pick up fresh farm-to-table ingredients for a wonderful dinner. Maybe some handmade pasta. Then I will go home and take a nap. Then Sharon and I will spend the rest of the day cooking and drinking wine together. Then after dinner, we'll sit down to watch a movie on the couch and fall asleep. And maybe I'll visit my grandchildren. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Chatzi Kaddish, page 184. Please rise.